Dad sees little girl talk to fence every day, calls police when he realizes why. Jason sat there, a crippling feeling of uncertainty gnawing within him. When his daughter first started acting strange, he didn't think much of it, but after he found that letter, he knew that he needed to act. This was far beyond his scope. He'd need to involve the police as soon as possible. What was going on in his backyard? Jason Knightley had it all. He had a good, stable job. He had a beautiful wife and 2 amazing children, and he owned the house of his dreams. What he didn't know was that there was a problem with that house. The backyard held some secrets about its long past, and it was his daughter Lori who uncovered them. Ever since Lori's 6th birthday, she had been acting strange. She was used to her routine and had settled into it quite well, but recently she started doing something new and it started bothering her father. He knew there was more to the situation than he could see, and he wanted to find out what it was that caused the sudden shift. What had Lori been doing that was so strange? She would walk up to the property fence and start talking like there was someone on the other end asking her questions. At first, Jason thought she was just being a typical 6-year-old and having some fun, but he quickly realized there was more to it. Jason let it go on for a couple of days, but he quickly discovered that this had become a new routine. She'd do it every single afternoon. That was when Jason started getting suspicious, but he would soon discover that there was more to this than just a daily visit, and what he found would have him scratching his head. After observing her for a few days, Jason realized this incident happened at exactly the same time every day. Whether Lori was inside or outside, she would approach the fence at exactly 4:30 p.m. Did that mean something? Was there any significance to that specific time, or was her father just imagining things? At that point, his daughter's behavior had gotten Jason's full attention. He was intrigued by what he was seeing, and his intrigue quickly turned into a puzzle that he wanted to solve. So he spent every day watching Lori. He stayed away so she wouldn't pick up on it, but there was something about to happen that would force him to act. After a few days, Jason started wondering who it was his daughter was talking to. Was it a dog or a cat, or was it simply their next-door neighbor? He couldn't say for sure as he was never actually hearing the discussions, but that was about to change. He wanted to know what was being said and who was saying it. With that thought in mind, Jason decided to test the waters. One afternoon, while his daughter was pouring her heart out to her newfound friend, he approached. He could hear his daughter chatting up a storm as she sat on the grass facing the fence, but that wasn't what confused her father. It was the response that really got to him. Jason waited for a while, but he didn't hear anyone responding to young Lori. There was no neighbor keeping the discussion going. There was no excited dog barking in response, and there was no cat to give her an answer. Confused, her father looked over the fence, but what he saw left him even more confused than he was before. There was absolutely no sign of any creature on the other side of the fence. His daughter wasn't speaking to anyone at all. Or was she? Jason considered that his daughter might have an imaginary friend. It was common for children around her age and would explain her strange behavior, if only he knew how wrong he was. As the days passed, the situation started bugging Jason. His son had an imaginary friend when he was Lori's age, but he spoke about him all the time and even had him over for dinner. Why wasn't Lori doing that? Why didn't she tell her parents that she'd made a new friend? Was there even more to this situation? Was Jason missing something? Jason found himself constantly thinking about what it was that his daughter was doing. He was questioning every word that left her mouth when she was outside, and before long he was questioning everything she did. He knew that he needed to do something about this, but what was the right way to approach the matter? That night, Jason thought about everything he'd seen and heard. He knew he needed to come up with a plan, but he was still unsure of what it was that was actually happening. Before he could find a solution, he needed to find an answer. Was this as innocent as it seemed, or was there more to this situation? Also, if you have not done so already, please subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell to get inspired by these real-life stories every day. Now, back to the story. By the time he woke up the next morning, Jason was armed with a plan. He could get all the information he needed if he invested money in some cameras and installed them in the right positions. So that was exactly what he planned on doing, but he'd do it overnight so no one could see what it was he was really up to. Jason spent that day going from store to store, looking for the best deals he could find, and before long he was ready to go. Armed with his tools, he waited for nightfall. Once his daughter was asleep, he crept outside and installed the cameras where he thought he would get the best views. What would he see? Jason tried to calm his nerves for the next few days, knowing that he would have the answers sooner rather than later. He wanted to collect enough footage before he looked, and no one could blame him for that. But when the big day finally came, he was more confused than ever before. Jason looked at the footage and he couldn't explain what he saw. Jason spent hours going through the footage of his daughter's discussion, but he found absolutely nothing. There was nothing there for her to talk to. That was when the father knew something was seriously wrong. Something was happening in his backyard and he needed to find out what. What would he ultimately discover? Jason spent countless hours wondering what it was his daughter was up to. Who was she talking to and why? Why didn't the cameras capture anything? His mind was filled with questions that he didn't have the answers to, and it was starting to drive him mad. Would he ever uncover the truth, or was he just wasting time on figments of his daughter's imagination? At this point, months had passed. Jason had reached the point of no return and his mind was filled with worrisome thoughts. He'd done extensive research into imaginary friends and now knew that his daughter's behavior didn't fit the description. There had to be something else. But what was it? What was going on in his backyard? Jason couldn't just stand by and watch anymore. He needed answers. He needed to know who his daughter was talking to and why. He couldn't let this madness continue anymore. Jason had to get to the bottom of this before it was too late. What if his daughter was in danger and he didn't see it? In Jason's mind, there was something sinister going on behind closed doors. He had discovered that no one lived in the house next door and it was a playground for criminals. Was one of those criminals targeting his daughter? Was she talking to one of them? The thought sent a chill down his spine, but it was a possibility he couldn't ignore. Jason couldn't get the thought out of his mind. He was sure one of the syndicates had been trying to get their claws into his daughter and he couldn't allow that. He was more determined to solve this puzzle than ever before. But what could he do? Should he call the police or should he stop his daughter from going outside? All Jason knew at that point in time was that he couldn't let any harm come to his daughter. She was the most precious thing on the planet and he couldn't let anyone take her away from her family. A firm knot formed in his stomach as he tried to come up with a plan, but there was only one thing he could think of to help her. In order to keep his daughter safe, Jason forbade her from going outside. She kicked and screamed in protest, but this time he wouldn't back down. The only time his daughter would be allowed in the backyard again was when he was 100% sure that no harm would come to her. Would that work? Jason kept watching the footage, hoping that he would find evidence to prove that he was right about the syndicates, but he saw absolutely no movement next door. No one had gone into or left that house in days. Was it because they saw his cameras? Or was his mind getting the better of him? Was he the one with an imaginary friend, or in this case, predator? For the next few nights, Jason couldn't sleep. His mind was going over all the possibility that would explain his daughter's behaviors, but he simply couldn't come up with any other explanation. That was until he woke up one morning. Something told him to watch the previous recordings, the ones he'd already seen, and that was when he saw it. Jason went over the footage he had captured before locking his daughter inside, and that was when he saw something he'd missed before. This was the crucial piece of information he was looking for. It was the clue that he'd spent months trying to find. But what did he see? Was he right about the syndicates, the criminals? Jason had to run an errand and pause the recording. It was at that moment he noticed something strange. The trunk of the tree planted just in front of their house revealed the boots of an adult person. Jason focused a bit more on the image and faintly saw the profile of a man wearing a cap. The dad was in complete panic. He decided to call the police. An investigation was launched shortly after Jason shared the video recordings with them. A few months later, the mystery was solved when they discovered the same man was wanted by the police as a suspect in a kidnapping case. He was found, arrested, and sentenced to several consecutive years in prison.